A lot of us who work in startups are really excited about being able to build something from zero. I did that. There was a startup I worked with at Google in their internal incubator called Area 120. I worked on a company that is kind of like started as a Stitch Fix, connecting consumers with stylists for clothing purchases. But the purchases were all done via a referral link, and you just went to a website and bought it. The idea was building a relational commerce. And when I joined, I ended up they needed to be able to say they needed to be able to capture purchases within the app. They wanted to provide a universal shopping cart and a way to say we actually have the data and information on what purchases are being made, and this allows us to actually make more money, but also have a higher understanding of our customers' profiles, and then build from there. And that was a real 0 to 1 experience of I was the first person figuring out how do we get an order placed. When we get that information, how do we fulfill it? Where does a customer email for customer service? What are the emails and contact points they need to receive? Building that up, creating the system, and then starting to hire people on to manage that as the team was built, and kind of grew that from 0 to about 2,000 monthly orders and 100,000 monthly GMV. So that was a really exciting process. And I'm really glad I had that experience. And then I've had experiences where I come in when I came into the startup after Google, or when I came in as a consultant after I was laid off, into spaces where there's already something happening, but there is something broken. Something is not working. The team isn't functioning well. It's been mismanaged, or like the organization just isn't kind of clipping along. And in my mind, what I've realized is that there's this difference between cooking of creation, like I did with e-commerce, and then fixing, which is kind of like cleaning. So when you are cooking a meal, you are throwing everything in the pot, you're kind of splattering sauce everywhere, you're dicing up, and it's super fun because then you deliver this meal to everyone and everyone feels full and satiated. But then afterwards, there's the mess that has to get cleaned up. And for some people, they love cooking and they hate cleaning, and the joy from creating. And then there's some people who love the order you get from creating that, from cleaning everything up, right? And bringing, spotless countertops and putting everything back in its place. Some people like both as well, of course. And so I think what surprised me, having done both now, is startups and tech really glamorize cooking, which makes sense because you are creating something new and special that you're sharing with the world. But for everything you cook, you need to clean. And there is much less of an emphasis on that cleaning, the fixing part of this equation. And so now that I've actually had a couple experiences in this cleanup mode, I was surprised by how much I actually enjoyed it. So I had joined a startup where there was a really hardworking team that I was managing, but they had been basically taught to be a firefighting team. They hadn't really been managed directly. The leadership had been spread too thin. It was a tough situation. I understand how it was there. But it meant that they were missing their goals. The goals weren't even necessarily the right ones. Everything was all over the place. And so trying to understand what's happening here, figure out what the problem is, being the steadying force in an otherwise turbulent environment. There were a lot of these elements that I realized actually worked really well for me. People tell me that I can be very grounding for them, and that it can feel like, there's a steadiness, and realizing that that's a skill set that's actually really important, whether or not the business is booming. It doesn't just mean the business is failing, right? There can be an amazing company that has a really struggling part of that company. And the skill set you need to address that and solve that problem is quite different from the person who's going to start the new product or create the new service or build the new whatever. But it doesn't mean it's less important. This shows up also in the way that jobs sometimes are created. So I think of a SWE versus an SRE engineer. One is creating new code. One is maintaining existing code. And I think engineers, maybe this is a hot take, sorry, engineers, don't come at me, is that it's kind of more attractive to do a SWE role because you're building something new. But at bigger companies, if you don't have the SREs, then your company can still crumble no matter what new things you build. So this appreciation for the two things that are there. I think I realized that cleaning can be quite joyful because when you come in, there's almost this Zen factor of the bad thing has already happened. The bad thing has happened, and now I'm trying to figure out where things are now and pick up the pieces. But you're still using a lot of the skills from cooking. I'm still trying to build the relationships, because if I don't have a strong set of relationships, the team that I'm taking on will not take to me. And so it's almost like you're the medicine. I'm mixing too many metaphors, but it's almost as if the body rejects something that's introduced to it. You still need to use a lot of those skills, but it can be really cool to take a group of people or a team or a product that was struggling. And then as you figure out what's wrong and you slowly introduce changes, you bring this team back up. And it was so exciting to see this team come from a place of, are we doing the right things? We don't really know what's happening, to, wow, what they said was, I've never felt more excited to be on this team. I've never felt more clear on my direction and on my goals than I do now, 4 to 6 months after you kind of came and introduced these things, which is not to say that I'm, uniquely qualified at this, but I think that there are a lot of people who will overlook that work in anticipation of the newness that they can build.